good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Welcome back, dear listener. The Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove podcast, a special edition. There's 5 of us in the room tonight, and Deep Throat has returned after a long absence to tell us all about voluntary assisted dying. So this is the Iron Fist Velvet Glove podcast. I'm Trevor, a.k.a. the Iron Fist. With me, as always, is Paul the 12th Man.
Greetings, Earthlings.
Shay.
Hello.
Still needing a pseudonym. Sharkbait Shay, or what was your suggestion?
High Flyer.
High Flying Shay? High Flyer? Shay the High Flyer?
Yeah.
High Flyer Shay? Deep Throat Craig, welcome again.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Jay the Tech Guy.
Evening all.
Right. So, look, we've got enough stuff on the agenda, dear listener, to last us a 5 or 6 hour podcast if we wanted to.
I should have brought a sleeping bag.
That's it. Anyway, we're going to talk about voluntary assisted dying to kick off with, because we've got an expert here with us. And then we'll move into other topics that are going on around the world, from Tokyo Olympics, safe, reliable power, Deliveroo, property auctions, Spanish stamps, Chinese masks, the Archibald Prize, even the Queensland coat of arms, and Boris Johnson. A whole heap of things that we could get to, see how we go. If you're in that chat room, like Daniel, say hello and make some comments. We'll try and get to them. So voluntary assisted dying is on the agenda for Queensland at last, like really on the agenda. So we've got a situation in Queensland now, Deep Throat, where it's been through different law reform commissions, and there's been lots of public hearings, and we're about to have, or we have had, the draft bill tabled in the Queensland Parliament.
It was tabled last Wednesday, and I was there. It was
Right.
no, not last Wednesday, last Tuesday. It was. We didn't really know exactly when it would be, but so it was a small group of us, 4 of us from Dying with Dignity Queensland, and we rocked up and we left because we didn't think it was going to happen. Then we got word that it was happening, so we rushed back up to the public gallery, and so we were there when it happened, and it was a very emotional time for us 4 at least. It was interesting in that when you were looking at the public gallery, and on the left was the Labor members, MPs, they were all very attentive, watching the Premier give her speech about the bill, because it was too long to read it out. So she just gave a précis of what was going on and made a few remarks. And I was quite impressed with her speech. But on the other side, half of them weren't there for a start. They'd left after question time. And most of the others were on their texting on their phones and on their
That's probably par for the course whenever the other side is talking.
Yes.
I would have thought.
Yes.
They haven't been in.
Whatever the bill or occasion.
Yes, and whatever the situation, they would pretend to feign disinterest in what's going on.
Yes, and I think you're
Probably.
absolutely right. It was my first time in the public gallery. So for me, it was a stark sort of thing that was going on. And I don't think it's a good look, personally. And I think if any other public member was there, it's not a good look. And in fact, there were school kids coming in and out. There was, like the tourist guides going in and out all the time while we were there.
Yes.
And I don't think it's a good look for them either, seeing our parliamentarians sort of acting a little bit childish, should I say?
Agree.
Yes, yes.
And we see this regularly on the broadcasts of the federal parliament. And it's often mentioned in the mainstream media. They'll, to shame some parliamentarian, they'll flash a photo of that person sitting in parliament just looking at their phone. And you're right, particularly when young people are coming through, it sets a very poor example.
Yeah, and I think this is, excuse me, I think this is a little bit different in terms of this bill. I think this is an historic bill that's being tabled. It's not just like supply or something like that, where I think probably a bit of argy-bargy is warranted. But with this, I think it needed respect, and I don't think it was shown by the opposition by half of them not being there.
Craig, do you want to give your credentials? Just can you state your official position? Or
I'm Vice President of Dying with Dignity Queensland. We have 2 Vice Presidents, so we just thought the position needed a bit more oomph.
Yes.
So they looked around and said, "You'll do."
What about diversity quotas?
Diversity quotas
in the organisation?
in our organisation, I have to say, I think the average age is 74. So
Right.
we're a certain demographic. And
You're one of the young ones.
I've not been able to work it out. I don't understand why.
And which...
But we had a change in our secretary who was sort of... I haven't asked, but I'm assuming she's in her 40s. So our average age of our committee just sort of plummeted. So that was a good sign. So
yes.
Yeah. But
yep. So let's talk about initially how the legislation works in terms of, I've got an illness and I'm thinking I'm worried about a pretty grim ending that might be painful, that I might want to cut short with some sort of medication. So do you want to run through the mechanism?
Yeah, I can run through for you.
Yep.
Excuse me, I think that with a croaky voice. But the person has to be dying and they have to be suffering. So, and I say both of those things because one of the comments from the Queensland Law Reform Commission, where this bill's come from, was that you have to look at the whole package. And I think I've seen people make mistakes by just looking at one aspect. And if you don't look at the whole package in respect to that one thing that they're talking about, that you can miss what's really going on. So anyway, so there. Do you want me to actually talk about the process or talk about the criteria and things like that?
Everything. I think just assume we know nothing, and we do.
Okay.
Like, it was only because I just read some stuff this afternoon in preparation. But the actual mechanics of it, what people would have to go through in order to arrive at that moment where they get injected.
So you have there's 5 criteria that you have to meet. So a person has to be have an eligible condition. They have to have decision-making capacity. They have to be be making it in a voluntary capacity without coercion. They have to be at least age 18 or above, and they have to be a resident of Queensland. So that's the first major criteria. Now, I'm sort of summarising a little bit. If you go to the actual condition, the eligible condition, then it has to be their words are a disease, illness or medical condition where it is advanced, progressive and will result in death. It also has to be that the death will be expected within 12 months. And also, what's the third one? I've got it here somewhere. It has to be causing suffering.
Right. If you're not in any pain or discomfort, then it doesn't count.
No, that's right. There has to be suffering. So that's why I mentioned at the beginning.
What sort of disease would you be terminal and there would be no pain associated?
Well, the two things that spring to mind, which are very common, are chronic obstructive airways disease, where the person's like a fish out of water. And in some ways, can you imagine not being able to get your breath and you feel like you're suffocating?
Right.
That's not a good way to die.
And that wouldn't be included in this?
It is included in this because that's suffering.
Okay.
That's suffering.
What's an example of one that... I see I've got a friend at the moment suffering from cancer and it's all through his body and it's pressing on nerves and he's having to take enormous amounts of pain relief to get him through the day. So I see that. But can you just describe a condition where you know you're going to die in 12 months and you'll experience no pain until the time?
Well, take that instance, but another person who has cancer and they have no pain.
Right.
They have no symptoms at all.
Right.
The cancer is progressing, it's advanced, and it is going to kill them, but they're well controlled with palliative care and that. Right. Or they don't even need palliative care. So some people go through this process without any suffering at all.
Right.
I'm trying to think of other conditions and that there could be, you could even look at a sort of like a disability type thing where the person, and let's make it clear that disability in itself is not a condition for having voluntary assisted dying. But if you're a quadriplegic and it's a very high one, you might be suffering in terms of your inability to do things and that. So everyone will be different in that sort of circumstance, but they may be suffering, but they're not actually dying, So they're not dying and they're not suffering. So, and there's lots of chronic conditions where people, their life isn't as good as what it should be, but they don't meet those two criteria, dying and suffering.
Right. Yeah. So Do you want to talk about this whole thing of the first doctor, second doctor, back to the first doctor sort
Yes.
of situation?
So the whole idea was to make sure that there were safeguards, because this is what's been focused on by a lot of people, and especially the opponents of voluntary assisted dying. Someone added up all the safeguards in the Victorian legislation. It came to 68. I don't know what it is in Queensland, but apparently in South Australia it's 70. They've gone 2 more or something. So, but what it means is there has to be something in place to make sure that we don't see coercion. We don't see people, suddenly deciding they want it and then they get voluntary assisted dying and they would have changed their minds. So one of the concepts is having safeguards and making sure that the process is enduring. So from an enduring point of view, from first request through to last request, so there's 3 requests have to be made, is 9 days. I think in one of the other jurisdictions it's 10 days, but anyway, for Queensland they've decided on 9 days. So the person approaches a doctor, usually their own doctor, and says, I want to access voluntary assisted dying. Now, that might come up in the conversation as well. It might not be right there. So that has to be the first one. Then that doctor has to accept the request and become the coordinating practitioner. So they're going to follow through with this person through the whole process.
And is it expected that normal GPs will do that in most circumstances, or is it going to be more of a specialised sort of role, or what do they expect to happen there?
It's going to be a little bit of both, because starting off, there's not going to be many doctors on the ground who have done I was going to say a course, but it's not really a course, but have to fit the eligibility by doing some sort of training. And this is happening in Western Australia. It's happening in Victoria. And so there has to be eligibility there. There also has to be that the doctor has prior experience in their specialty, so that you're not, so some doctors won't be able to do this, and they would have to refer the patient to another doctor who does have those qualifications, has done that training.
Okay, so if I've got cancer of the liver or esophagus or something, is my GP, and it's just a normal average GP, would they say, well, I really don't know about your 12-month, 18-month, 2-year diagnosis, it's going to be up to a specialist to determine?
No, I don't really think so, because in the normal course of events, in treating that person for that or managing that person, they would have reports from various specialties, specialists.
And they can rely on that.
Okay. Usually the GP has a better handle on what's happening than the specialist, actually.
Yes.
They're more in tune with what's going on.
Yep.
And often how the person's going in terms of their overall well-being in that. So
okay, but the GP will have to have done some course or training.
That's right.
Okay, we're not sure how much that is or whatever.
Not at this stage. No,
okay, yeah,
no,
which is probably, I don't know, I'm suspecting a lot about making sure you comply with the rules.
There will be checklists. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of check boxes that you have to go through. That's right. That's right.
So more of a legal training to tick the boxes is probably what's involved.
Yeah, but there will also be that clinical aspect as well, because you want to. So the coordinate. So you get that first request. Say the first request is to a GP who says, "Yep, done the training. I'm happy to go forward with this," and they will become the coordinating practitioner.
Yep.
So they'll do the first assessment. So the next step is the assessment. And that's where this checklist will come in.
Yep.
And at that assessment, they also need to make sure that the person is doing it voluntarily. There is no coercion. So and that they have decision-making capacity. So that's your legal sort of part there with that decision-making capacity. And then after that goes through, if they're happy that the person does qualify, then the person then has to see a second doctor for a second assessment. And that's called the consulting practitioner.
Right. And who decides who that's going to be? Is it up to the patient, or does the first doctor help them out?
The first doctor can help them out.
Right.
But in Queensland, there will also be a navigating service, which will provide, will help the doctor and the patient and the person find resources and maybe other doctors. Yeah. So it just depends on on a lot of things, like
Okay.
where they are, and
Just playing devil's advocate, you
Yep.
could see if you've got a GP who's the first coordinating practitioner who does a bunch of these and always refers people to the same second practitioner, it would open a sort of a suspicion of collusion between the two of them potentially. Do you
Yes.
know what I mean? Like,
yes.
yeah.
And so there's another body called the Oversight Board. I don't know what the name of that's going to be. Probably the Voluntary Assisted Dying Oversight Board. So during this process, reports have to go off to this Oversight Board. So if they saw a pattern or something
Right.
going on, they go, hang on, something's going on here.
Right.
So there is,
Yeah.
so that again, this is one of these 68 safeguards, or how many safeguards there are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So second practitioner looks and goes through a similar checklist.
Yep.
And says, I agree, this looks like a suitable case. And that's kind of considered the end of the second request. And then it goes
No,
back.
that's the end of the second assessment.
The second assessment.
Assessment.
Okay. Then it goes back.
Then it goes for the second request then.
Right.
So the second request is important because it has to be done in writing. It has to be before two witnesses who have to certify that the person is making that request, again, without coercion and all the other things.
Right.
And so they make that request. So
And that's not with a doctor, that's done with
no,
two
that's
other
with
people.
two witnesses. That's right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
All
yes,
right. Well,
yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So,
So-
two totally separate.
Totally separate.
What sort of people?
Well, they have to. There's. I can't remember all the there are exclusions, like
Like
into with,
lawyers.
yeah, like
You don't want them involved.
lawyers. Yeah. Yeah, don't get lawyers involved. No, well,
Family members or no?
It depends if the family member gets some sort of would benefit from it. Like the usual things that you see in
Right.
law in terms
Okay.
of like
If you've got a conflict of interest,
a
you
conflict
can't
of
be.
interest. Yeah,
You
yeah.
can't be
Yeah.
the signatory. Okay.
Yeah,
So
I can't remember the exact details, but it's those sort of things which are
Right.
commonplace in law that you can't be benefiting from
okay.
signing this.
So after the second assessment, somebody then makes a second request to two people, not either of the doctors, and these people swear that okay, this person made this request and seem to be of doing it voluntarily.
Yes,
so
right.
okay, so they've made their second request to those people, and then what happens?
So at that stage, it's then there'll be a third request, which is the final request, and at that stage, if and that's made to the coordinating practitioner, who is again documented and sent off to the oversight board, and at that stage, that's when the prescription can be written for the substance. Yeah.
Right.
So that's the process. And then, so there could be quite a delay between that second request and the final request. Okay, it can be quite a delay, or there may not be so much of a delay. So it all depends on how the person's going in terms of their condition.
Yep. And if you receive the medication and you don't use it and you just sit on it for a while, is
Well,
that okay?
there's two aspects here. Okay, so in the Queensland legislation, it could be administered by the person themselves. They take the substance,
Yep.
okay, or it could be physician administered. Now, if it's physician administered, it would be done by an intravenous type route.
Yep.
So it depends on which way it's going to go. So if it's going to be self-administered, okay, then the person needs to have a contact person who can have some responsibility for, after the person dies, notifying the coordinating GP that this has happened, because the GP or the coordinating practitioner doesn't have to be there, doesn't have to be present when that person dies. And also they have to notify the oversight board, so that a report has to go in.
Yep.
Now, say the person dies before they get there, or they change their mind, and that's fine. All the way along here, the part of the process is, do you want to go ahead with this? It's
Funnily
just
enough.
yeah, that's right. Ad nauseum, to the point that the person will be going, stop saying that, right?
Yes.
So, but anyway, it's part of the process. So So if they change their mind at the last hurdle, and they'll be asked, all the way through.
Yeah.
So even by the pharmacist who delivers the substance, they will ask, do you want to go through it? So all the way along, people are asking.
Yep.
So if they didn't go through it or they died, then that contact person is responsible for notifying the coordinating practitioner and making sure that this substance is disposed of properly. Now, how that's disposed, I don't know. There's going to be some sort of regulation or check.
Right. Okay. But if you thought, I'm just not sure what the pain levels I can take. I want it early. I want it sitting there so I can pull the trigger and have it whenever I want. You could be sitting on a lethal dose in your cupboard for months.
You could be. Yes,
Yeah.
you could be. So the legislation is up to 12 months in terms of it's supposed to be death expected within 12 months. So yeah, it could be. I know in Victoria it's delivered in a locked box, so and the key and all that sort of thing.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because the whole point of this is people often find the fact that they've got a choice and they've got the ability to put a stop to it if they want to is enormously comforting.
It is.
So it quite often would be the case, I would imagine, where people might well sit on it and not use it, but they just get great comfort from knowing it's there if they really need it.
Yeah, so we're seeing figures coming out of Victoria where I think it's like 32% don't use the medication, and that's sort of in overseas as well. It's around about those sort of figures, and that's a big factor. People are scared and people are worried about how they will go at the end of their life, and so it's an amazing comfort to know that you've got an out if you need it. You've got an out. So, and the other thing to mention in this score too is that 70% of people in Victoria also go through the palliative care route as well. It's not an either or thing. So they're doing that, but they're hedging their beds, and that's not bad. I like that idea. That appeals to me. Yeah.
12 months for Queensland.
Yep.
In terms of expected to die within. Victoria was 6. Is that right?
So in Victoria,
except in some limited circumstance or something like that?
It was for motor, neurological conditions, but particularly motor neuron disease. It was 12 months and 6 months for the rest, and that's the same in Western Australia.
Yep.
But the thing to note is that the original legislation, the draft legislation in Victoria and Western Australia, was for 12 months.
Yep.
And it makes sense. So to me, I didn't see the debates or anything like that, but you sort of think, well, was this one of the fudge things that came in amendment-wise, and it was an amendment thing, to decrease the 12 months to 6 months? There's no rational reason, I don't think, to drop it down to the 6 months, because say you've got chronic obstructive airways disease, that would be like motor neuron disease. That can be quite a slow process of dying. Chronic heart failure, dying of heart failure. I don't see any rational reason to have this delineation between all conditions and then neurological conditions, the 6 months and the 12 months. So, and the Queensland Law Reform Commission have looked at the Victorian legislation, the draft legislation, the Western Australian one, and said, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. So we're saying 12 months too. So I think in Queensland, we've got an opportunity to improve and stick with the 12 months, which expert panels have said this is the best time frame.
So one of the other differences is in relation to an institutional conscience.
Yes, that's the big one, isn't it?
That's
the elephant in the room.
Interests me. Yeah. So this one, dear listener, institutional conscience. A Catholic Archbishop of Brisbane, Mark Coleridge, and Uniting Church Queensland moderator Andrew Gunton said the draft bill failed to deliver the promised right of institutional conscientious objection. And so the bill allows practitioners a conscientious objection if they don't want to be involved. But this Queensland bill has got provisions in relation to institutions, facilities, hospitals, whereby they can't simply say we want nothing to do with this and hold people. They have to start accommodating and helping out in this process.
So there's controls for coercion on both sides is what we're saying.
Yes, exactly. Coercion's by the institution. So do you want to describe, because I've bastardised the concept there badly.
Can I just back up a little bit? So it enshrines the right to conscientious objection by health practitioners, okay? And I think everyone's fine with that. I don't see any major problems with that, except for the fact if that they use that objection to cause unnecessary delay in that. And so they're in the Queensland legislation that's been tabled, they say that the conscientious objector must inform the person, if they make that request, inform the person that there may be other options, okay, in terms of getting help or things like that. So
that's a bit familiar, like the abortion law. Sounds a lot similar thing, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah. So it's keeping it very vague. And if they can't even do that, then they must then refer the person to the navigation service and saying your navigation service will help talk to you about options and that. So it sort of does help the conscientious objector in terms of not having to frame it in so specific terms, but it also puts the onus on them to not just leave the person high and dry.
Yep. They can't be left uninformed.
That's right.
Yep.
So that sort of sets the scene then for the entities, these like nursing homes, hospices, hospitals, and that sort of thing. So this was a tough one for the Queensland Law Reform Commission. They could see two very competing interests here in terms of what people thought should happen. So they dealt with it by breaking it down. So they broke it down in terms of the process, in terms of the request procedure, the assessment procedure, and then the administration procedure. Okay, so when they looked at the request part of it, they said, no, institutions can't, intrude on people's rights by saying no. You can't even talk about it. You can't make a request.
Yep. I'll just set the scene a little bit here. When we went to a lecture, I think you were with me at QUT.
Yep.
Where they were talking about the Canadian experience, and over there, basically they end up relying on some sort of human rights provision in the Constitution to enable this. But what they found with religious hospitals in Canada was that there was this right for voluntary assisted dying, but the hospitals were making it really difficult for people to access it. So they had patients in their hospitals who were wanting to access voluntary assisted dying, and they weren't allowing people in with the necessary paperwork, and then they were making it really difficult for those patients to transfer to a different hospital. And there was one of the stories was of the people with the paperwork having to be disguised as delivering flowers, like as florists, in order to enter the hospital to present the paperwork.
Yes.
And then a terrible story of a man, I think it was, who underwent enormous pain in getting transferred out of the hospital to another hospital because the trauma of transferring through the ambulance service was...
That's right. I think they had to bring him out of the sedation and the and his pain relief, so he was with it enough to agree to be transferred, which put him through terrible misery. Yeah.
So there was that sort of concern where institutions become very obstructive to outside people wanting to use the law. So that's the background as to what's in the back of the minds of people with this. So sorry, go ahead, Craig.
Yeah. So how it will work is that in that request process, the institution cannot stop someone going in, like you said, and saying, the person to receive that request, all right? That can't happen, with requests. And their rationale was that this is part of normal life. People come and go, and relatives come and go, and we don't put restrictions who people can see just because they're in a hospital or an institution. So that was their rationale there.
Yep. So that's a coordinating practitioner, or that's just the
request process. So that would be to the coordinating practitioner.
So that's allowing the coordinating practitioner into, say, a Catholic hospital that doesn't like the idea of this.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
He can come in as of right.
Yeah. There's a little bit of extra stuff there to a little bit of argy-bargy there, but basically that's the thing. The same with the assessment process. Okay, so the assessment process again is in this case it's the doctor and
the second doctor.
The second doctor. That's right. So the same process there. Again, a little bit of argy-bargy, but effectively, yes, they can go in, and this is this makes it different from the Victorian sort of legislation.
Yep.
And the part that was difficult for them was then the administration part of it, allowing.
Okay. Also, you've got the
so
two witnesses.
And the witnesses,
presumably
that's
the witnesses
fine too.
come in.
That's all good. That's
as
part
well.
of the request process. So
Yep.
there's all the requests,
Yep.
same deal.
Yep.
All the two assessments, the same deal.
And I think as I was reading it, I think if instead of those people coming into the hospital, if the patient wanted to go out for the day to meet these people, was that facilitated? I think.
Yeah, they're allowed to do that. That's
yes.
right.
And
That's
the
right.
hospital has
And
to
the
sort of
hospital has to
facilitate that.
Facilitate.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we've back to the final administration of the drug.
Yes.
Yep.
And this is where the Queensland Law Reform Commission had to think very seriously about this. So in this situation, if the person is able to, the desired thing from the Queensland Law Reform Commission is that the person, if the institution don't want this to happen in their facility, the person has to transfer to another facility or somewhere where they can either self-administer or if the practitioner thinks it's necessary, be administered by the practitioner. So that's the stand thing. However, again, they did a little bit of argy-bargy here. So that if the person, it would cause harm to the person, it would cause distress or whatever, then the person would be allowed to have it in that facility.
Right.
But very strictly controlled. So for all intents and purposes, they would be being referred out of that. But they left this possibility of it still occurring in the facility. So can't give you the exact details because I haven't been through the 800-page report carefully yet, but I will do. But essentially, that's what's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm.
I sense a lot of legal work coming up,
Yes.
potentially
Yes.
forcing these institutions to cooperate.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, that's the process.
I think the alternate place could well be inside the most vocal churches. So you could go and self-administer, go and sit in the church and self-administer.
You've lost me, Joe.
Having been given the medication
Right.
to end your life,
Yes.
if you're not allowed to take it in the aged care facility that you are
Right.
living in,
Yeah.
that you should go to whichever church is most vocal,
Right.
sit in the middle of the church and take the dose.
Right. Okay. Yes. That's
Or if it's a Catholic-run institution, they might have their own chapel. You could just sneak out.
Well, possibly.
I suspect these people
Secrete
are
yourself in the
a little
chapel.
bit thinking about other things at this point in their life that
yes.
might make them not think about protest movements.
Yeah. That's going to be where the fight is going to be, and over that you can see there'll be a lot of lobbying by powerful groups.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
That'll be
So,
interesting to see.
And that's where. So I think when it comes to the second reading, and that's when the debate occurs, and that's when amendments are going to come forward. It's going to be on that 6-month thing because they managed it in. So they're going to say, well, it's in Victoria, it's in Western Australia, we should do that too.
Yes.
And the other one's going to be this. Yeah, that's right.
So this is quite unique, this part about the institutions.
Yes, this is where we're going forward in Queensland. And I think it's good that we're improving on Victoria. Let's face it, Victoria needed some improvements. Western Australia did this in some areas, and they improved on it, but we've just gone that little bit further.
Yeah. Okay, so Western Australia's got a similar institutional conscience, not applying type thing, but not as good.
Not as good.
Right.
That's right.
Okay. So just backtracking a little bit, the sort of lobby group behind all this has been working for decades almost.
Oh,
it's
yes.
funded by the Clem Jones estate.
No, well, that's
or
not true. I thought that when I was sort of just a member before I became on the committee. So to give you a bit, so we've been going at least 30 years, but I think the organisation was sort of there in some form before it became formal and incorporated and all that sort of thing. So I've heard various figures banded around, but it's at least 30 years and it's probably more like 35 years.
Right.
So a lot of people have come and gone, and a lot of people have died waiting for the legislation. So, but along the whole process, the numbers in the community who support voluntary assisted dying has been growing. So we're over 80% now in terms of support.
I thought you told me a story where they sort of recognised that Queensland will never be the first for anything, and that they actually invested a bit of money helping these groups in other states,
Yes.
hoping that that would set an example that Queensland could then follow.
That's true for Victoria. So the Clemens Jones group has stepped in here and there.
Yes.
But as the chairman of the Clemens Jones group said to me, don't wait for the pot of gold. There is no pot of gold coming. We're getting nothing from the Clem Jones Group in terms of money.
Right.
And if we do, it won't be a big amount.
Yep.
Having said that, the Dying with Dignity Queensland has worked extremely closely with the Clem Jones Group and also Doctors for Assisted Dying Choice. In fact, we call ourselves a coalition because we have expertise in various areas. And it's been a very fruitful coalition. Even though there's no pot of gold.
Yes.
So I respect what the Clem Jones Group's done. It's worked tirelessly in the background because they don't really push their own barrow, really, and they do an awful lot of work, and they've done incredibly good work in terms of pushing voluntary assisted dying.
Yeah, we've mentioned it before. Clem Jones, former Lord Mayor of Brisbane.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
some of the listeners might not know.
Successful businessman, responsible for creating the sewer system for Brisbane, and much beloved sort of Lord Mayor, one of the ones that most people look fondly upon, and his estate had some money, and his wife had a very tough death, and so that was one of the motivating forces for the estate putting money into this sort of area. So be a really sweet sort of victory if it comes.
Yes.
Because nothing's guaranteed.
No, it's not.
But the whole idea of playing a long game, supporting other states first, because you knew Queensland will never pioneer anything, and then being able to...
there must be something that Queensland has pioneered. Can you think of anything?
Not off the top of my head, but
But
Fitzgerald Commission. But that was because we probably had a terrible... the worst corrupt system to begin with.
They've had inquiries into police corruption in other states, of course. I don't know what the who came first, but be interesting to find something that Queensland has done first.
Yeah.
But look, I have a question, Craig. If you satisfied all the requirements for eligibility and you obtained the drug, you said you have to use it within 12 months. Is that correct?
You've got me there. I don't know what the time frame is.
Can you receive it and then sit on it for 12 months?
I don't know. I haven't read that. Somewhere buried in that 800 pages will be answers about that. Yeah. But again, that 12 months is really a prognostic thing that's not set in stone. That's what medical practitioners will think that the life expectancy is. It could be a lot. They can't say for sure. So there'll be cases where it's longer than 12 months and the person's not ready to go through the process. So, I would imagine that could go over the 12 months. But there may be things in the regulations when they come out, because the regulations have to be put after the legislation, that that there are checks and balances, and the oversight body says, look, are you still a goer with this? What's happened type thing. So,
And I have a question as well. Do they amend it and then put it to a conscience vote, or do they put it to a conscience vote and then argy-bargy about the finer details?
With the second reading, that's a very good question. So with the second reading, I think it just gets tabled as the second reading, and then they do the debate and putting amendments in that. Okay. And then the final reading is the, if that's what it's called, is the actual vote. There's no discussion about, no debate about it. It just happens, yay or nay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so from here on in, it's kind of up to them.
Yeah. So what's happened is that after it was tabled by the Premier, she has sent it to another parliamentary committee, to the health committee, for 12 weeks. So in Queensland, it's been a very arduous time.
Yes.
And so this again will be the committee will look at the actual legislation, the proposed legislation from the Queensland Law Reform Commission. So I would expect that the Labor members of the Health Committee, and there are 3 Labor members, there's 2 Liberal and there's 1 Independent. And so there'll be argy-bargy going on there. The same as with the report that came out after parliamentary inquiry for 18 months. Here we've got a 12-week one on top of an 18-month one. And in that one, the Labor members, and there was the Independent was the Green member, Michael Berkman, they were totally in favour of voluntary assisted dying, while the 2 dissenting voters, who were LNP, put in a dissenting report, but the majority report was in favour of it. So you could sort of see this happening again. I mean, are they going to change their mind?
Well, the leader of the opposition has said he'll give a conscience vote. So, and he said it's a genuine conscience vote, not one where we're going to crucify you afterwards if you don't follow the party
Which is what
line.
happened with the abortion.
Yeah. So we'll see how that pans out.
Yeah. So it's a different crew, isn't it, with Crisafulli as the LNP leader this time. And we have a little bit of a boot in the door, because Campbell Newman is now back in the I don't know what they call the LNP committee or whatever it is, and he's strongly in favour of voluntary assisted dying. In fact, he says it's one of his big regrets that he didn't bring in voluntary assisted dying when he was Premier. So I'm hoping, this is my hope, I have no evidence for this, I'm hoping that his influence there will muzzle the
Christian fanatics.
That crew who last time, made life very difficult for those 3 dissenting LNP voters, MPs. So I'm hoping that won't happen this time. And also, they got an awful lot of flack from doing that. So the word got out, and I don't think they can afford that to happen this time. However, that's just all wishful thinking on my part. Who knows what happens in the back rooms?
Yes. So this article I've got here says that they'd expect a vote on the bill in September. So if it's passed, it would likely come into effect in January 2023.
Yes.
By the time you've got all the stuff in place.
That's right. There's a whole lot of things got to happen. There's got to be training of medical practitioners. There have to be regulations put in place. There have to be guidelines put in place. And setting up of the oversight board, the navigation services, an awful lot of stuff to be done. And in Victoria and Western Australia, that was an 18-month process. But what the Premier said, because there was a delay getting the Queensland Law Reform Commission report through, and it was, I understand, because the amount of work that's gone into 800 pages is massive. She said because of that delay of 3 months, the process for implementation has come down to 15 months. And I think that's reasonable, because they do have what happened in Victoria, they do have what happened in Western Australia. So surely they can do it in a shorter space of time than the 18 months. So it's 15 months rather than 18 months.
Looking around the world, Oregon was one of the first places to bring what they called a Death with Dignity Act back in 1994.
Wow.
Yes, but it wasn't the first in the world. The first in the world was the Northern Territory.
You're
going to ask me what date it was, but it was before then, whenever it was.
Of course. Yeah. Was that right? Is that right?
Yeah. So the Northern Territory, with the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, Marshall Perrin, he brought that in. Yeah. And then it was quickly squashed by the because it's a territory.
Was it Kevin Andrews?
Andrews,
Private Members Bill.
Yeah, that's right.
What party was Marshall Perrin?
1995. Northern Territory.
95. They had something like country. They had different. Was it the Country Party or
Country Liberal Party?
Yeah, something like. Yeah.
Hang on a sec. Oregon was 1994, and you're saying 95. It's
ABC says 95, but says it was the first in the world.
Okay. Well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can't help
here we go. It passed the Act in 94, but it didn't take effect till 97 in Oregon. So there's all these sorts of that might explain that.
Yeah.
So the Oregon law, so it didn't take effect until 1997, and as of 2017, so in a 20-year period, they'd had basically 1,100 patients had died from ingesting the medications provided. In 2016, that was 133 people. Most participants, 70% of them were 65 years or older, and most, 77%, had cancer. So I don't know about Victorian experience.
Can I just say that the
Mm.
Oregon legislation has been the template, you might say, for the Victorian legislation, and the Victorian legislation template for the Western Australia, and then Western Australia for us. So we are following the Oregon model. You'll hear a lot of the opponents bringing up about the Netherlands and Switzerland and even Canada and that, but they're completely different in some ways in terms of their historic way that they've come about in that. So we're really following the Oregon model.
Yep. Let me just tell you a little bit about some of these other ones. So Netherlands and Belgium, the patient only needs to be experiencing unbearable suffering without a prospect of cure. Doesn't have to be terminal, and includes dementia, alcohol and drug addiction, mental illness and disability. So they're very different to what's being
very different
referred to here. Both Belgium and Netherlands remove the age eligibility criteria. So Netherlands...
Age as in 18 and above?
Yeah, they removed it. So, but I did hear a terrible story about some young teenagers who had terrible pain and suffering as 13-year-olds, and it was really cruel to say that just because they weren't 18, they weren't able to access voluntary assisted dying. But anyway, in Queensland, we'll be cruel and we will just...
That's right. Yeah. There's not going to be any changes in that regard. And just a little bit of a comment about the Netherlands situation, the Belgian situation, is that those numbers, if you talk about numbers below 18, they're incredibly small in terms of what's going on. And when you actually look at what happened, you go, oh my goodness, well, I can understand why they allowed this to happen. Just if you're 17 years and 11 months, is it going to make much difference in terms of your decision-making capacity than if you're 18? So decision-making capacity is something that's that lawyers and doctors deal with all the time. It's not something magical, and depending on what it is, kids can make decisions like this, but this is all speculation because it's not going to happen in Queensland.
Yep. So the problem with this podcast so far this evening, Craig, is that we're just agreeing. We're just agreeing with each other.
Oh, okay.
And we don't
the
have
12th
enough.
man's been really disappointing. Like, where is he? Where's the 12th man?
Oh, this fits in with a libertarian theology.
Oh, I see. That's why he's been quiet.
Theology, if you don't mind. Theology, indeed.
Let's get some alternative viewpoints in, and let's deal with those. And if you're always looking for, alternative viewpoints, the best place to go to is the Spectator.
But look, isn't it interesting that Marshall Perrin was in fact a member of the Country Liberal Party? We all assume that the so-called Conservatives are always against things like this, and clearly they're not.
Can I make just a little bit of a comment in regard to Marshall Perrin? He's actually a member of Dying with Dignity Queensland.
Indeed.
And because he lives on the Sunshine Coast now. And I've spoken to him a couple of times, and and also heard him speak. And he said the biggest mistake he made was not making it exclusive to the Northern Territory. So that gave Kevin Andrews a big in to say, no, we can't do this because people are flying in from South Australia or whatever they were going to do. So he said that was his biggest mistake.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, this article in The Spectator by Tanveer Ahmed.
Yes, I know The Spectator does publish pieces by people who are opposed to it.
So let's just make a few statements
As
from
they
it.
should.
And we'll just see. I'm interested in your response, Craig.
Yep.
So he said, the edifice of public support for euthanasia is built on a lie that people know what they might want in the face of dying. The truth is, almost all of us don't, especially in a culture where there is a marked taboo around death. Our inability to consider broader risks in the wake of the pandemic highlights our aversion to even consider facing our mortality. This feeds further misconceptions about painful death and end-of-life care, corrupting informed debate about assisted dying. So we're kind of not capable of deciding these issues because we don't talk about it enough, and people don't know what they want in the face of dying. What do you say to that?
I guess I might not have a good perspective on what he's saying. Okay, I want to be charitable to what he's saying and listen to his argument. For a couple of reasons. I'm a doctor. I've seen a lot of death. Okay, it's I worked in a palliative care unit at one stage and a hospice hospital. So I've seen a lot of death. Myself, I've been through a life-threatening illness myself, so I've got that perspective as well. So I'm trying to step out of myself to think what the average person would be talking about, would be thinking on this regard. I know from our members, and we've had numerous meetings and information sessions and things like that. And I tell you what, our average age of 74, those people, they get up, they tell you all about death and dying and all that sort of thing, and what their families have been through and all that sort of thing. So depending on your demographic, if you're in that age group, you've seen people die, you've seen people suffer, in their death. So I'm not sure he's right, in that sense. When you're young, you're bulletproof. You're not even, you don't even want to think about these things. And even if someone brings it up and you are thinking about it, you just don't. It's just the way it is. So that's my feeling. I'd be interested in what you guys think about what he said there.
Anybody? Is there any merit in that?
I just keep thinking about my dad, because my dad's like, he thinks the voluntary assisted dying improves his chances of his kids killing him. I'm always like, Dad, one good push down the stairs, mate, would be much, much simpler. And that's true, really, isn't it? But how do you talk to people that are fearful in that way, even though it's
okay? So that's the sort of the coercion from from other people, where people aren't making a voluntary decision.
In that assessment process, just it is important for the doctor to not have relatives there when they're doing that assessment. Okay, so it's part of one of the safeguards is to not have someone sitting there looking over and making sure that Dad does the right thing. I'm thinking about you, Shay. So there are safeguards built in. But honestly, when it comes to the actual thing happening, the stories coming out of Victoria, it couldn't be further from the truth. Most people don't sort of start from the process where they don't want their mum or dad or anyone to do this. At first, they're sort of like, what are you talking about, sort of thing. So, and then the good part about it is the family starts to talk about it, and then they often come to a consensus about, in terms of, well, this is what he really wants, and I can see what he's coming from or she's coming from in terms of suffering. And so it's just not what happens. All these things you hear, these stories you hear, it's just not what's happened in Victoria.
These assessments, I imagine they're questioning these people and they're saying, what is your condition? Why do you want this? And if people aren't giving what seems to be a logical, coherent reason as to why, then they probably don't pass the assessment.
Exactly.
Right.
And this is nothing new for doctors. This is something we do all the time. We're suspicious people. Someone sitting in front of me, you want to really know where they're coming from. So for whatever reason, maybe nothing to do with dying, it's something that we do in terms of assessment. We say, malingering and things like that. You've got to be on the ball. You don't want to, you don't want someone to pull the wool over your eyes, and also things like someone's doctor shopping for drugs and things like that. We've been through all these things. As soon as someone walks through the door, you virtually know, but it's part of the process that you have to do it in a professional way and tease these things out. Lawyers do it. It's just something we do.
It may seem a strange analogy, but I keep thinking of when I had my vasectomy, because the doctor said, why are you here? Why do you want the vasectomy? I said, well, I've got 4 kids already. I'm happily married and I don't want any more. And I'm at an age where I would not be starting a second family. And he said, fair enough. lie down and we'll get going on this. Like,
Yeah.
but he asked the question.
Yeah.
I gave a damn good reason why somebody would want a vasectomy, and he said, "Yep, that makes sense."
As for young people, I was talking to my 16-year-old about this.
Right.
The fact that legislation has been tabled, and we've had to put 2 cats down in the last 3 years.
Right.
So she has gone through that process of, they're terminally ill, they're in pain, and it would be cruel to let them suffer anymore.
Mm.
And so she is very conscientious of that. And I don't think that's unusual in her age group to look at, having lost a pet, to just thinking that thought process and extending it slightly further to humans.
Mm. Oh, fair enough.
So I don't think that children are in any way naive about this.
Mm. Yeah.
And what Joe says kind of like refutes what the article says, because actually what's happening is a dialogue's being opened up.
Mm.
Like if you could go to the doctor and be that frank about a range of things, it would, open the conversation up over and over.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, still from the same article where this
Yep.
guy was against it. Many patients are told they only have 6 or 12 months to live, yet survive years or even decades. A sizable minority of patients, as much as between 15 and 20%, I am told, who are under palliative care are discharged home and not to the pearly gates. Given how poor our feelings are in computing probability and mathematics, you can bet a percentage of sufferers who go through with assisted dying would have otherwise survived. This is especially the case in the draft laws drawn up in Queensland, with the 12-month time limit, blah, blah. So the sort of argument that it's very difficult to judge terminal illness and lots of people live beyond the 12 months, having been told they've only got 12 months left.
Yeah, this needs to be unpacked a little bit. Okay, so maybe it is 15 and 20%, okay? I think it probably is, but not from what he's coming from. That's a distortion of the facts, okay? I've worked in a hospice. I've worked in a hospital that's, for palliative care. Palliative care physicians are extremely good. They do get people really, back and feeling pretty good. And you know what? They get discharged to go home. But I tell you what, they're not cured of their incurable disease.
Right.
They're either going to die at home or be back. Okay, so yeah, I'm sure 15 and 20% or whatever do get discharged. All right. So I think it's a distortion. I just see a distortion of the figures there. Okay.
Yep.
What was the other thing? Have only lived for years or even decades. Now, when you're going through the diagnostic process, okay, there are possibilities where a health professional might get it wrong. Okay, it's possible. A lot of most of the time we don't get it wrong, but it's possible in difficult diagnosis to get it wrong. In cancer, it may be that you don't quite get it right. But that's part of the diagnostic process. That may be down the track that you get to the true diagnosis, okay? And you have working diagnosis sometimes as you're going through it. Now, so if he puts it at that very first time, well, they live forever because you got it wrong. It wasn't cancer, it was TB or something like that, okay? Well, yeah, sure, but I hadn't got through my whole process, okay? So I think, again, he's cherry picking there.
Yep. And those people are unlikely to choose voluntary assisted dying if they're going okay. If they're not, if things are improving, they're taking the medication and they start swinging, back upwards and onwards, then they're going to say, hang on, I'm feeling pretty good.
It will not even pass their consciousness that about voluntary assisted dying. They're not at that sort of stage. Yeah,
yes.
That's right.
So really the counter argument is you could only have this system if you could be assured that 100% of people will die within 12 months, absolutely guaranteed, rock solid. And I mean, why do you need that guarantee? It just doesn't make sense, does it?
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
The other thing because you gave me the heads up that the Spectator article was coming, so I did look at the accuracy of the prognostic process.
Yes.
And as I've said to those, it's one of the heart sink moments when as a doctor you're asked, "Oh, doc, how long have I got?" And you go, "Oh, God," because you have a bit of an idea, but you are truly dealing with mathematics in the sense that for that group of people with, say, pancreatic cancer, right? The percentage, there's the death rate's pretty horrific, but there are 5% of people who don't die. There's always going to be a percentage who survive, okay, in terms of the prognostic situation. But you know what? When that's dealt with right at the beginning, you don't know who they're going to be, and they are nowhere near, as Trevor was saying, nowhere near the voluntary assisted dying stage of things. So he's, it's not being very honest there.
Yep.
Yeah.
A slippery slope, he says.
Well, the slippery slope's been dealt with, and it's been dealt with by Oregon, all right? We are following the Oregon model, okay? In Oregon, there's been no change. There might have been the minor thing like crossing a T or dotting an I or something like that, but there's effectively been no change since 1997. So the slippery slope thing just doesn't occur. It just hasn't occurred, and again, we can't say what's going to happen in the future, what our kids are going to do or our grandchildren are going to do. They might come up with some other thing. All legislation should be open to change down the track, but it doesn't look voluntary assisted dying is going to be one of them. It's very stable.
There's another reason he gave here, which might interest you, 12th man. He said, it is generally accepted that people should be allowed to do what they like with their bodies and live their lives as long as they don't harm others. But a key facet of modern conservatism must be placing limits on the corrosive hyper-individualism of progressives, including many on the moderate side of the Liberal Party. This principle of autonomy reaches its zenith for rational suicide. So he thinks that
why do you
voluntary assisted dying is
especially relevant to me?
Is hyper-individualism. He's criticising the hyper-individualism of this libertarian sort of philosophy that he sees. I don't think it...
what does that mean?
I don't know. These people are just thinking of themselves, is what he's saying.
Strange, that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Look, I don't agree with him, but I do think it's good that publications are willing to publish alternative viewpoints.
Yeah.
That's purely,
to be honest, I couldn't
a
find
healthy thing in our society.
Yeah.
I couldn't find many alternative viewpoints, so that was the one I found, and I didn't really think they were great arguments, but they're the only ones I could find.
There's another argument, which is palliative care is great.
Yes.
We can control pain.
Yeah, how about that one?
Okay. So in the parliamentary inquiry and also in Western Australia, I don't know about the Victorian one, they were able to demonstrate through studies and that there is a core percentage of people who do not respond to palliative care and who are suffering, whether that's pain or some other symptom. There's no symptom control. So the figure they came up with was 5%. I've seen figures of 4.2%. But we actually have some real numbers, what I think call real numbers, which was the palliative care outcome collaboration, which is figures from a government organisation, and I think the University of New South Wales is involved in it as well. So it's a well-respected sort of collaboration, and they come up with figures of, I think it was just under 15% don't get good symptom control in palliative care. And also Palliative Care Australia, which is a peak body for the palliative care physicians, and they were very against voluntary assisted dying, do acknowledge that palliative care does not control symptoms in all patients. And so they're the figures. We have to accept that that's the figures.
So I wonder why they'd be so against it if they're aware that it doesn't always work.
I think their position has softened, and it's softened in a way in terms of saying, well, this is not something that we should decide. This is something that society should decide. So they've become more neutral. And across the board, most organisations have done that. I think the organisation which hasn't taken that position now is still the AMA. But I get the feeling that maybe that's softening in Queensland.
The AMA is not in favour of voluntary assisted dying.
No.
Right.
No.
But the AMA doesn't represent every doctor in Australia, does it?
No, it's something between 27 and 30% of
That's
doctors.
all?
Yeah, that's all that are in it. Now, they might have different figures for that, but because I could be a bit out of date on that.
Because, I mean, if you see a news article on TV and they invariably interview somebody from some professional body. If it's something like this, they may well interview someone from the AMA. So I think a lot of the viewing public just assume, the AMA represents all doctors, but
regular listeners to this podcast who have been with us for 6 years have heard you talk about this before. Deep throat. It's a skewed representation of the medical community.
That's right. It is.
It's the older
it's the older,
demographic
more,
of
and
doctors.
the more specialists than the GPs who would be, GPs mostly belong to the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners.
Yep.
So,
So, but the AMA, that's interesting. You would still think, even with that skewed demographic, that they would be in favour of voluntary assisted dying.
I think it's changing, and I've seen some indication in some figures in Queensland that their membership is now doing a bit like the Catholic Church, that the members are in favour of it, but the
hierarchy is not.
Isn't at
is
this
that
stage.
Right?
So I think it's changing. I think it's going to change. I think suddenly they'll just fall into line and say, well, that's something for society to decide. We just implement whatever society decides. So I think that's going to happen, but I'm not holding my breath.
Right.
The other, I just want to tell a little bit of a story from, I sat in all the parliamentary inquiry, public sessions from the public parliamentary inquiry in Brisbane. I missed one. They put an extra one in, and then I'd made other arrangements, so I couldn't do it. So I don't know how many there were. There was at least 10. There was quite a lot, probably more. Now, when the AMA made its representation before the committee, they had their ethics guy. It was a doctor who had qualifications in ethics. Now, he got up there and he went on and on about the reasons for why the AMA were doing this. It was all about what the AMA's position was, what the AMA's ethics was, and all this. Now, the thing that got up my nose was that when you, as a doctor, are practicing evidence-based medicine, and that's very important. It's an important pillar to me. It's one of my 3 big pillars, is to practice evidence-based medicine before I retired. And when you look at what that means is, I can't say the exact words, but it's that doctors should apply the best clinical and scientific evidence with the skills they have learnt and the skills they are to apply with the values of the patient. And the AMA were not looking at the values of the patient. They were looking at the values of the AMA. So by doing that, in my mind, they were not practicing evidence-based medicine. Now, I've seen this a lot in organisations where it's about the organisation, it's not about the patient. But when you're face on face and I usually have my patients on the side, not across the table, on the side of the table. When you're on the side of the table with your patient, then you're looking in the eye. It's not about you. It's not about your values. It's about them. And very often there'll be a clash there that you go, oh, gee, I wouldn't do that if it's me. But it's not me. It's them. And you have to respect their values. Now, there may be times when they cross the line and say, well, I want to kill mum or something like that. It's never happened. But there's things where you've got to say, draw the line, okay? But mostly you've got to say, well, look, that's their decision and that's what they want to do. And that's not what the AMA has done. It's consistently not followed evidence-based medicine. And that's annoying to me.
Okay, so the opponents to the bill at this stage, we could say possibly the AMA hierarchy would be, are they against it or are they just not in favour of it? Like based on what you saw at that meeting, they were against it.
At that stage, they were definitely against it.
Right.
They were solidly against it. They were actively trying to convince the committee that this was a bad idea.
Right.
But they weren't alone, because the very first group that was called up in front of the parliamentary inquiry in the very first public meeting was a group with a massively great name, but they were basically palliative care doctors, and they were palliative care doctors involved with the Catholic, the MARTA system and all that, because the MARTA and St. Vincent's and all that, they provide 55% of palliative care.
Yeah.
And so they were so heavy against this. To be fair to them, they were also there to push palliative care.
Yeah.
And I've got to be clear about this. Dying with Dignity Queensland is not against palliative care. We want better palliative care. 70% of people who want voluntary assisted dying also want palliative care and follow that pathway before they go on to voluntary assisted dying.
And perhaps articles like the one we were looking at before, perhaps they project the idea that it's either or, do you think?
Yes, and it's not.
And
It's not.
Why
They're both.
should it be?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And if you look at the experiences overseas, often the Catholic hospitals come into the fold. When it's all over, they go, oh, gee, we're supposed to be doing this, and some jurisdictions, the Catholic Church is letting them in.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's all of them. It'd be interesting to see what happens in Australia because already the Uniting Church is saying we're not happy about this, but oh, gee, push comes to shove.
Well, people will start selecting their hospital based on whether they're going to be allowed to have this procedure or not.
They'd be wise to, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Yeah. So
I mean, if this sort of thing has crossed their mind, they'd be very wise to check all that out.
Certainly those that support it, I think, will use it as a selection point.
Mm. So the opponents are the AMA, some parts of the palliative care community or practitioners.
But they are backing off, so yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, the religious elements. Any particular religions?
The big one's the Catholic Church.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. They're the ones who are not only against it, but prepared to spend money against it. We saw, who was the ones that spent, that was in the abortion debate. No, sorry.
$1 million.
Yeah, $1 million. That was for the same-sex marriage thing debate, wasn't it? But
right.
they're prepared to spend a
Sydney
lot of money.
Anglican.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Anglicans, maybe not so much? Not as hardcore?
Probably
it's hard.
depends on the Anglicans because the Sydney diocese is known to be much more conservative.
Yeah.
But in terms of Queensland,
Yeah.
Our friend
Queensland
Wendy,
hospitals,
was she there?
Where, sorry?
Wendy Friend?
Oh, yes.
Oh, in the Australian
Yeah.
Christian lobby, for example.
At the parliamentary inquiry meeting. Yeah. And,
And I'm guessing she didn't support it.
no.
Yeah. Any Christian groups any religious groups come out in favour of it?
We have to say straight up that most Christians want voluntary assisted dying.
Yes.
Most Catholics want voluntary assisted dying. I've seen figures of 74%. In Muslim populations, I'm not sure if it's over 50%, but it's a significant number want this legislation through. So it's only the hierarchy that are mostly against it. Now, we have worked not as closely as, say, with the Clem Jones Group and Doctors for Assisted Dying Choice, but there's also Christians for voluntary assisted death, I think they call themselves, and they have been very active in terms of counteracting these Catholic groups and Cherish Life and those. So they're quite active. So and the other, we have one of our members is a chap called Everett Compton. Now he's an elder of the Uniting Church, and he's also was the head of Older Citizens Australia. Or I've got the name wrong, but anyway, he's been very active for, I think, for the whole time that Dying with Dignity Queensland has been going. So he's written a book just recently about it as well, which we're starting to try and get a bit of funds for Dying with Dignity Queensland. So there are a lot of Christians involved in this space who want this to go through. Now, he had his book launch, which I went to. It was sponsored by a couple of parliamentarians, so that was done in Parliament. He invited along Reverend Peter Catt, who is he's the what's the term for deacon or something? I don't think that's it. But anyway, of the St. John's Cathedral. So he's an Anglican. Mm-hmm. And he was put on the spot there about, do you support it? And he said, I don't know.
Right.
So, but he was very supportive of the same-sex marriage debate and that. And so some people just haven't thought about it, and I think they could be swayed. They're not coming straight out and saying, no, I don't agree with it. So, if that's an indication of the Anglican position, then I think in Queensland they might fall into line once it goes through.
Any idea, question without notice, what the percentage of private hospitals that would be Catholic and Anglican at all?
Don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know. But, you know, certainly in the... So there's a fair percentage. So, yeah, don't know for sure. But the Catholics have got a big percentage. I'd say they're the major percentage.
Uniting Church have quite a few as well.
Uniting Church has quite a few. But there are quite a few private ones too around. But they tend to be smaller. Yeah, private ones.
Dear listener, this is just a crazy situation. We've got religions in charge of our private health system, but that's for another day. Like, for goodness me.
Can I mention just one more thing? And in reference to this article from the Spectator, where he claims that in the West we don't talk about death. Do you think that's really true?
I
mean,
I suspect compared to other
cultures, to which culture?
I don't know because I'm not in another culture, but it's hard to know. But
certainly,
I don't think we're good at it.
No, I've had conversations with both my parents about what's going to happen in the event of their death, but not long conversations.
I just don't know, because compared to what, compared to which culture do they talk about it well? I really would like to know.
The Irish are quite good.
Are they?
A lot of my uncles already have their plots, and it's quite.
But lots of people in Australia have already sorted their business when they reach their elderly years.
My mother's got her plot sorted. True.
Well, a lot do, don't they? And they may not have a plot, but they've probably organised something. They might. Like I remember I think my parents or my mother at least had a membership in a funeral fund, and I think my grandmother did as well.
Maybe less around
so you
that.
Don't mean
a more, if I was to become on life assistance, at what point do you pull the plug?
Yeah.
Those sort of difficult conversations are ones that we're not having. And a lot of people in aged care facilities, there are some real horror stories about ambulance people going there and performing CPR on someone that they know that they're not going to bring it back, but no one's had the conversation to say, look, if you have a heart attack, are we bringing you back, yes or no? And the assumption is yes, because no one's had that conversation.
Yeah, that brings out the advanced health directives that needs to be pushed. I think compared to other states, Queensland has been progressive in that area in terms of trying to improve advanced health directives. They do need improving, and in fact, in the Queensland Law Reform Commission document, it mentions about that there was they actually did a review on this 10 years ago, and they say there's definitely a lot of work still that needs to be done. So I think that's something that's got for a future sort of project, maybe for Dying with Dignity Queensland. And certainly in the lead up to in the last 10 years or whatever, we had meetings in nursing homes and all over the place in terms of, and one of the big things was talking about advanced health directives and that. So I can see a role for Dying with Dignity going forward after this in terms of
what sort of reception did you get for those conversations?
Great, yeah.
See,
yeah. So people are worried to talk to people in nursing homes and that. These people have been through a whole lifetime of experiences of that, and sure, in the 60s they were hippies or whatever too, like in the 50s or bodgies or whatever. Yeah. They've been there, done that. They're not scared to talk about these things. Yeah.
So just harking back to your thoughts about cultures that might have expertise in dealing with death, and I'm just trying to think about it, and it really, I think, depends on experience and exposure. And in our culture, we, in recent times, have basically shuffled our old people into nursing homes, and
rather than taking care of them. And
I think a community, and I, stereotypically might think Italian or Greek or something, where the nonna or whatever is still living at home and still with the family, and basically passes away in the home, or to a large extent, the deterioration is obvious to the family and is more in your face, if you like. I think those communities that are just confronted with it more would,
You don't think
if
the
they have that living
families-
environment.
You don't think the families would have been talking about it? Because I think in my family, I mean, it wasn't something we talked about every time we spoke, but we certainly, I know my sisters who managed my mother's affairs when she was very elderly before she died. I'm sure they had a plan, you know.
Yeah, but it's not so much the person who's about to die; it's the other people around them.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
I'm sure they had discussed it because she was very old. Everybody was fully expecting she would go at any time, you know. So it was no big shock to any of us when she finally did pass away.
I just from my own personal experience at the moment, I've got two very close friends who are unfortunately terminally ill with cancer. And I can see from their experience that they've got friends, one in particular I can think of, who's got friends who don't know how to deal with it and don't know how to talk to him and don't feel comfortable about the whole thing. They're not sure what he wants or what they should be offering. And there's a tendency almost to sort of withdraw from people to some extent and not engage, and because you think you're interfering in these last months or
you might upset them.
Yeah, just people not knowing what to do and therefore withdrawing. And I might have been the same, but I had, unfortunately, the experience with losing Leon at 18 years of age, and I could relate to grieving, and what people needed at that moment was people to come to the house and to talk. It didn't have to be about Leon or whatever, but that contact and engaging. And so I feel I'm probably one of the better qualified and with more expertise than a lot of my mates' friends, because I've kind of been through a grieving process. I know what it's like, and so it's sort of an experience. If you've been in a community where there's been death, you'll be better at dealing with it.
And of course, it's a bit different when the person who dies is a young person.
Yeah. But it's
I think you've touched on an important point there in terms of people also relate to someone that's been in their shoes. So I remember when I was going through my problems with cancer, and that a chap at the same time was going through a prostate cancer problem, and I saw him in the supermarket, and I went up and, oh, g'day, how's it going? What's on your plate for tomorrow? And he said, oh, I've got chemo, I've got radiotherapy tomorrow. I said, oh, it's going to be a fun day at the office, and that sort of thing. And I got feedback from him later. He said, oh, you're the first person that sort of just connected with me about, you know, the realities of the whole thing. But the thing was, he knew I'd been through a similar process myself, and therefore he related. So I think, well, for you, Trevor, with Leon and that, you know, you've got the same sort of empathy from that point of view, but they also, the person also knows that they can sort of, in a sense, trust you because you've been there, sort of thing. And with Dying with Dignity Queens, we have a 1300 number that's been manned for years and years and years, and people ring up from time to time, both those who are thinking about voluntary assisted dying and those families as well, who might be saying, "Oh, geez, talking about this, what's all this about?" type of thing. And what I've gleaned from that, I've not been on the 1300. I don't answer the phone. But what I've gleaned from that is that people are probably a little bit standoffish with their own GPs, and that they're thinking, oh, do they really support voluntary assisted dying? I'm thinking about this. Can I talk to them? And I have talked to them, but do they really listen to me and stuff like that? But when they ring that 1300 number, they know we are in favour of voluntary assisted dying. We are in that camp, and they're a lot more likely to open up and talk about things. So I think that's a very powerful thing when you've been through the same thing as another person. So yeah.
In the chat room, Bronwyn says, if you want to see how another culture deals with death, watch The Casketeers on Netflix, which is about a Maori funeral director in New Zealand. Very interesting.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Trust Bronwyn on that one.
Yep.
So
check that one out.
Yes. so that's a tip there. Right. Anything else you need to get off your chest about voluntary assisted dying?
Oh, gee.
Have we missed anything in this whole process?
Look, I I apologise for not having read the 800 pages.
Yes.
It's been a really hectic week and a half or whatever it has been since it's been tabled, and I've been just flat out doing all the things just to keep help with the organisation and going forward. So I do apologise that if I've made some mistake or I haven't been across something, I do apologise for that.
And going forward now, what is the organisation doing now? Is it counting numbers? Is that what's happening now?
Yeah. So I haven't got the latest on who's where and what, but we keep track on politicians that we know are 100% supportive of us. Unfortunately, they don't get much attention from us because we're banking on their vote already going forward. We have, there are some concerns. I hate to say it, but if they're a Catholic Labor person, we have some concerns that they, even though they're on the Labor side of things, they might not vote for voluntary assisted dying. So we have work to do there.
So what does that work involve? Are you approaching them and talking to them and cajoling them?
Yeah. Well, we're not cajoling them. Okay.
Persuading.
So
what's wrong with cajole? Isn't it just...
It implies coercion, doesn't it?
It's not a... Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We've taken the stand in dying with Dignity Queensland that we will be just factual, we'll be respectful, we'll be civil, and we'll do it in a non-emotive way.
Yep.
And so we approach MPs. Some of the committee do that, but we're very reliant on our members and supporters doing that and getting out and doing that. It's very important that they do that. We also rely on our members and supporters to send letters or emails because some people aren't comfortable seeing their MP. For some, it's a big deal. But so we rely right across the state on people doing those sort of things. When you divide the organisation over the state, there's not that many people in each electorate. And surprisingly enough, we've got more people in each electorate in country areas than we have in Brisbane. Because in Brisbane, everyone goes, "Oh, someone else will do this."
Yep.
So we're doing that, but we're also actively lobbying MPs. I was invited, actually. I was invited by Yvette Darth, the Health Minister, Shannon Fenneman, the Attorney General, and Stephen Miles, the Deputy Premier, to talk to them, to have a briefing with them. And that was whenever it was, I can't remember, a week or so ago. And that was interesting. So we had representatives, 4 of us from Dying with Dignity Queensland committee. There's the Clem Jones group were there, and Doctors for Assisted Dying Choice, because we're sort of in a coalition.
Yeah.
And that was interesting because you usually have, up to now, you've usually had a bit of problem sort of getting in a little bit, and also getting them on side. But the feeling to me was a bit different in the sense that they'd taken a stand. These were strong supporters, MP supporters, and they were now sort of looking at us and going, "Now we need your support. You've been trying to get us to support it. Now we've done it. We're doing this. Come on, guys! Now ramp it up.
Right.
we need you." So the strong message I got was, "Yeah, look, now we need your help. Get out there and do it." And so we asked them, what do you think is the best way to do this? And they said, well, go and see your MPs, and if you have a story, I shouldn't say a good story, they're usually really sad stories, a story about something that's happened to your family or your loved one on that, that's the thing you lead with when you see your politician. And so that's something I've learned, is to tell my story. When I first started seeing politicians, I was going, I won't say anything about me, but in actual fact, that's what they want to hear. That's the thing that they, connects them with their community. So we need to keep doing that. But in terms of the lobbying and that sort of thing, that we are doing this with Doctors for Assisted Dying Choice and the Clem Jones Group in terms of the politicians and that, and lobbying in Parliament House. Yeah.
For those watching on the live stream, it's got some crazy person in the chat room. Did you manage to get that off the screen? Like, just take the chat off the screen, Joe, until that'll be the best way of getting rid of it. Somebody's going crazy in the chat room. All sorts of nonsense stuff. So that distracted me there. So this isn't the case where this got on the agenda through the Labor Party as the last item of the agenda, was that?
Oh, that was...
that was the abortion law or this law?
Yeah, that was with one of our committee members.
Was it this law?
Yes, this is it.
Okay, tell that story.
Okay.
Yep.
So one of our members is our other vice president. I won't say her name because you need permission for these things, sort of things.
Yep.
But she joined the Labor Party specifically because this was something dear to her heart, and she thought, well, got to start somewhere. So she sort of started at a grassroots sort of level with her local branch, and then got the local branch to agree, and then it went to the regional. I don't know. Well, you know all about the Labor. It goes to the
listen carefully to all this, show. This is a great story.
The regional sort of things, and spoke to them, and then that went through, and then she spoke to the policy committee or whoever they are. I'll have this story not quite right, but anyway. And
so
then,
far so good.
So far so good. And then the next step was to try and get it onto the Labor Party annual conference type thing. So they got it on there, but it got put right at the end in terms of that, because in previous years apparently they'd never got to the end. So there were things that never got done. So if you didn't want it done, you put it at the end of the. I'm sure sitting members, MPs will disagree with what I'm saying, but this is my story, and I'm telling it. And so it got in there, and anyway, it all went through really quickly through all the items, and there they were. It was voluntary assisted dying up there, and it goes to the vote, and all the members go, yes, we want that, and the people at the front, won't mention who they were, go, oh well, that's the done deal. It's all over. So that was just one person joining just to push this, and here we are. Here it is.
Great story.
Yeah, it is a great story. Yeah, so things can happen.
There's a lesson for you, dear listener. You can get things done. Yeah. Really good story.
But having said that, it does mean that you need community support, because the Labor members and are just community people, and 80% of them are going to support it. So if it goes to a vote, you're going to get 80% of people putting up their hands. So you still have to have that. You can't go with some crazy idea and expect people to run with it. They won't. Or do they?
Craig,
They might.
we've got a bunch of other topics we could go on to. But you're here, so I'm just and you've totally dominated the conversation.
Yes, that's right.
So why don't you just put the icing on the cake with a couple of your other stories? Anything else about voluntary assisted dying you want to get off to your chest?
No, that's probably enough. I could speak for, obviously I didn't know, but I can speak for a long time about it, apparently.
Yeah, you did very well. Very well. You've put the case forward very well, Craig. Well done. Just briefly, your experience. I want to come across two of your good stories. The guy with the silver treatment, just tell that one.
Oh, okay. One of my good experiences as a GP was having a medical student. Okay, before I had my first medical student, I was saying, "Oh God, this is going to take a lot of time, and I'll be losing money on the deal." And it sort of is a bit like that. It takes time away from your consultations, and you have to teach them and stuff like that. But having a medical student was one of the highlights of my career. Anyway, a patient that I hadn't seen for a long time came in and walked through the door, and immediately I knew what was going on. Sits down, and I say to the medical student, okay, take a history, do an examination, see what you come up with. And anyway, she goes through all this whole process and is sort of completely baffled about what I'm trying to get at from her. And I say, did you notice anything about the skin colour of this person? No, sort of thing. Like, well, maybe slightly dusky sort of colour. The guy had blue skin, right?
Like in that movie, what was it called?
Oh,
where they
Avatar.
go to
Maybe not that blue. Right. More of a dusky sort of blue. But there's a condition called blue man syndrome, and it's when people take too much silver, colloidal silver. And colloidal silver, I don't know how popular it is now because I've been out of medical circles, but it was very popular with people taking it for all sorts of medical conditions. But it builds up in the body and particularly the skin. So people, these people look blue. They really look blue.
Mm.
And so he had this, but so it's interesting. Medical students said it's not.
His heart rate's fine. His pulse is good. His blood pressure is great. His limbs are perfect. What the hell's he here for?
Yeah,
well, if you look closely at him, he's blue.
That's right. The medical students, you can understand they're sort of a bit anxious. They've got their checklist and they're going through their checklist, check, and they're not seeing what's straight in front of them.
Yes, yes. And also your Mother Teresa story.
Oh, Mother Teresa. Okay.
Yeah.
So I worked in a small hospital in India for 2 years, back in 83 and 84. And it was with Tibetans. Anyway, we had some really good doctors there. For some reason, I ended up as the superintendent of the hospital. It's a bit of a puzzle to me how this sort of happened, but
you look wise.
Yeah, I think that was what it was. I don't know, but we had some really, really smart doctors, and one of them was an English doctor she got the gold medal at university, so she was really, really smart. Anyway, she decided that get more experience in India, and she heard about Mother Teresa in Calcutta, and she said, "Yep, that's where I'm going to go down and help out there." So she went down to Calcutta, and it wasn't that. I don't know how long she was there. I can't really remember. It wasn't that long, a month, 6 weeks, something like that. And she came back, and she was totally disgusted with Mother Teresa. While I was there, we went through a whole heap of epidemics of meningococcal meningitis, and when she was there, it swept through the orphanages. The orphanage where she was working, and
is it highly contagious?
It's highly contagious, yeah.
From what? Air contact?
Both, yeah, both, but certainly contact in an orphanage, yeah. And she said to Mother Teresa, "Look, these kids just need penicillin, And India had its own really good pharmaceutical industry there, and penicillin was, even for our Indian standards, was really, really cheap. And all these kids needed was penicillin. And her response was, we just give them love, and that's all they need. And these kids were dying. So she came back completely disgusted about it. And this is this woman isn't she beautiful, sanctified or whatever the word is?
And yet her reputation is still pretty intact,
It's still pretty intact. And truly, you wonder, is that murder, when you fail to provide proper care,
Certainly.
Yeah. There might be places in India where you can't provide penicillin.
But as you say, penicillin wasn't difficult to acquire, wasn't particularly expensive.
And she had the celebrity that if she went, I want penicillin, she could have had it.
A lot of celebrities donated money to her. And what I read, and I don't know if it's true, but I read that she did spend some of the money building more, sort of convents or the what are they called? Not sect, but the order that she established. But I read that she sent quite a lot of the donated money to the Vatican. Just gave it.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Rather than expend it on these people who she assumed were going to die anyway.
Yeah, I think some of the Catholic philosophy has a lot to be desired, and that sort of reminds me at those public hearings for the parliamentary inquiry, there were Christians there arguing for suffering, that suffering was good, basically good for the soul, and I'm going, yeah, it's all right as long as it's not you that's suffering.
Right. Yes, you can choose that if you wish, but don't foist it on the rest of us. Thanks very much.
Looking at the reaction of the parliamentary committee sitting there, who were very diplomatic about a lot of things, that didn't go down well.
Right.
That didn't go down well at all. And another...
Sorry, what didn't go down well?
The idea of suffering.
The idea of suffering, at the end of life, this is a good
nothing
thing
wrong with a bit
suffer.
of suffering.
Nothing wrong with a bit of suffering. That was a tough one to
Some
stomach.
people say Mother Teresa
fetishized.
Fetishized, is that the word?
No.
Suffering.
Okay, yeah.
And I read one account of her visiting...
She said suffering gets you closer to Jesus.
Yes. I read one account of her visiting a facility in America where people were dying with AIDS. and apparently she was,
How-
asked by someone who was dying, please, help me, with this suffering, and she said something along the lines of, well, Jesus is, embracing you or touching you or something, and he said, well, tell Jesus to leave me alone.
Can I make a statement about voluntary assisted dying?
Yes.
It's all in the word, the first word, voluntary.
Yes.
This legislation, no one's going to be forced to go through this process. Okay,
Yes.
but at the moment we're all forced not to have the option of going through it. It's like lots of other legislation. It's compulsory. You can't break the law and kill people. All these things you're not allowed to do. With this one, the option's there. We just need the option that if someone wants to suffer, fine, that's their business.
Are there horror stories of people attempting at the moment to do a homemade, voluntary assisted dying, like with, I don't know, shooting themselves or other things?
There are other ways to do it, which an old friend of mine told me about years ago, and he prepared many years ago to end his own life.
Yep.
I perhaps shouldn't mention it on the podcast, but there are ways, and they're quite simple and quite accessible and quite painless.
I worked with someone who said his mother was dying of terminal cancer, and he and she had a discussion, and he had gone out and got what was necessary to help her when the time came, and his sister found out and said, if you do that, I'll report you to the police. And it was an incredibly selfish act on his sister's part, because his mother had asked him to help, and he was willing to take the risk of prosecution to do this, and his sister was, no, you can't take my mother away from me. It's an incredibly selfish act.
Yeah, we have figures on this from the coroner, and there's in the terminally ill who are at the end of their life, the suicide rate is 7 per month. In that population
For Queensland.
Yeah.
Right.
And so 84 in a year. So
And can you say typically how this is done?
in men, it tends to be often very violent, with a gun.
Right.
Yeah. In some, it's taking medication, stockpiling medication and doing that. Hanging. I had one of my patients hanged himself. There are various ways that people do it, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but they are often violent. And so one of the things that the opposition opposing voluntary assisted dying will come up with is that this is just suicide. This is just another form of suicide. But voluntary assisted dying isn't suicide, okay? The options, the two options between, for people who are at the end of their life and dying and suffering is dying and dying, but one of them is dying at their own time and their own circumstances. It gives them the option of reducing suffering, but there are no extra deaths with voluntary assisted dying. Well, with suicide, there is the option of living or dying. Okay, it's not it's a very distinct difference, and often for suicide, it happens in a dark, desperate sort of way, and in alone. With the stories.
That's the sad part.
It's the sad part. They're
yeah.
alone, and it comes from a deep and dark place inside them.
And earlier because they're fearful that they won't be able to have the strength.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly the reason. That's the reason. So the hope is, and I think there's some evidence for this, that by allowing people this option, and they may not take up it's just having it there is a comfort, and that they'll go through dying without having to resort to these sort of measures.
So in fact, it may prolong life rather than...
Exactly, and prevent suicide.
Exactly.
And prevent suicide.
As you said, sometimes people will commit suicide rather than wait longer with the fear, as Joe mentioned, that they might not be able to self-administer a drug or whatever.
It's the same with abortion. Outlawing abortion doesn't stop abortion. All it means is it happens in dodgy abortion clinics that have no regulation. And I think this is the same here. People put in a desperate situation will find a way out, and if you don't give them legal options, they'll take illegal options.
Mm. Well, Craig, you're a man of many talents. Next time you come on, you can talk to us about ye old English,
Yep.
shoemaking from the
Yeah.
Middle Ages,
Yeah.
archery, both able-bodied and disabled-bodied archery,
Yeah. You're summing up my life here.
and any other.
I think that's enough. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
yeah.
a delight to have you on, Craig.
Yeah. Can I just make one comment? Okay, that the 12th man's signing off or signing on when they're saying greetings, earthlings,
Right.
which is Erdelingus, and Erdelingus means farmers. So
Right.
earthlings, yeah. Erdeling,
Farmers.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Erdeling.
Earth.
So the word
earthlings.
earthling.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
means farmer.
somebody who's dealing with the earth is a farmer.
Oh,
That's
I
right.
see,
Yes.
Yeah. So
And you think
when-
of that every time.
Yeah, when
It's-
Paul says that, all I can think about is farmers.
I guarantee you're the only person who
You're the
thinks
only
that
person
way.
that does that. It's funny how those words crop into my head just because of my knowledge of
Yes.
12th century English. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, I think it was about, it must have been about 8 years ago. I wandered into a secular party meeting in the library at the City Hall, and Joe was there, and you were there, Craig, and
Yeah.
you were there, Paul, and it was an interesting group of people.
It was a
you know.
very
Yeah,
interesting
that's
group.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
And in fact,
very
we-
diverse.
And,
Yes.
and we've maintained
Yes.
friendship with quite a few of them, haven't we?
Yes. And who would have thought all those years later we would be here now in this doing this? Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
So, good on you, Craig.
Yeah.
We will not, attack any of the topics we had on the list
Yeah.
next week. We'll do that. So next week, I think I'm going to do a little bit of a book review type thing. I'm really keen on this book that I've been reading, and I might just do some sort of solo type thing, and then we'll have the panel back in 2 weeks. And so anyway, I'll say good night. Talk to you either next week or the week beyond. I'm not sure, but tune in and listen when we can. Off to you, Craig. Say goodbye.
West to Har, Erlingus.
West to high, Erlingus.
Oh, very good.
Good night, everybody.
And it's a good